The day I got the call from Charlie, I was in the middle of a routine I thought I'd be stuck with for a while. I had a job at a lab, working on some top-secret project that even I didn't fully understand. My wife, Susan, was home, trying to read a book but failing to concentrate. She'd been like that for a while, always starting the same chapter over and over. She'd kiss me goodbye every morning, her lips still warm from sleep, and ask how far it was from where we were to where we used to be. I'd tell her I'd write down our itinerary, hoping it would help her remember, but I knew it wouldn't. That day, as I was about to leave for work, the phone rang. It was Vicky, the secretary at the lab. "There's a guy here," she said. "Won't say who he is, but he's an old friend." I knew instantly who it was. Charlie Hodge, my friend from way back, the guy who'd been there when I was just a kid, the one who'd seen me make out with that Brit chorus dancer. I remember her talking about it later, and Charlie couldn't stop laughing. But today, his visit wasn't just for laughs. He looked serious, and I knew something was wrong. "Orson, our boy's in trouble," he said almost as soon as we hugged. We walked out to the grill where I usually had lunch, and Charlie ordered for us. "Elvis has got 2 problems," he said, his voice smooth and melodic, like he was singing a sad song. "And one of them only you can help with. Priscilla wants to go home." Priscilla. The girl who'd come to Graceland 3 years ago. The one who'd been promised to Elvis since she was a kid. She was 19 now, maybe 20, and she was unhappy. I'd talked to her a couple of weeks ago, and my mom, who lived near Camp Pershing, had told me about Mrs. Beaulieu's tears. "What's the matter with Elvis?" she'd asked. "Why doesn't he marry her or send her home?" I sipped my soda, thinking about it. "Elvis doesn't like people to talk about his problems," Charlie said. "But he's got the problem of his career, too. Did you see Frankie and Johnny? The shoots since then have gotten worse. I hadn't seen any of his movies since Roustabout. I'd avoided them, knowing they weren't the best, but Elvis had called me, asking if I'd seen it. I told him it wasn't out yet, and he'd offered to arrange a special showing. I'd managed to avoid that, but now with Charlie here, I knew I couldn't avoid this. Elvis asked me to come, Charlie said. He wants you to go see Priscilla. She's sad and lonely, and he thinks you might be able to help. I wasn't sure what I could do, but I knew I couldn't say no to Elvis. I'll have to talk it over with Priscilla, I said, but I'll go. Charlie nodded, and we finished our lunch, talking about old times. I thought about how much had changed since we were kids, but how some things, like friendship, never really do. Later that week, I found myself in Memphis at the Peabody Hotel. I called Priscilla, and she was ecstatic. I'll send a car for you, she said. I can't wait to see you. When the car pulled up to Graceland, the Presleys were waiting outside, Vernon, Dee, and even Grandma. And there was Priscilla, looking more beautiful than ever, dressed in white and gold, her dark hair held in place by a gold beret. She led me down the hallway to her room, and we caught up on everything we'd missed. She poured us both a drink, and I could see the loneliness in her eyes. Elvis still wants to marry you, I said, trying to be gentle. She stood up, took her drink, and looked at me. I know, she said, her voice barely above a whisper. But what does that even mean anymore? We sat there in her opulent room, surrounded by the luxury of Graceland, and I knew that things were about to change, but how, I couldn't say. I watched Priscilla as she walked over to her desk, her steps heavy with the weight of her heart. She opened a drawer and pulled out an envelope. Here is my ticket, July 20th, Memphis to New York. I'm going to see Jane Robbins. She's married now, and there are others from our school who are married too. But the king, he wants to make his own decisions in his own way, in his own time. She flipped over the ticket. Then, on July 23rd, I'm flying from New York to Frankfurt. My mom or Don, my brother, will meet me there. Don's grown up, and he's as handsome as you, but not quite. She gave me a little smile, trying to flirt, but it didn't reach her eyes. He's my brother, remember. He used to ask about the wedding, but not anymore. Her voice broke, and she tried to hold back a sob. Orson, I'm a laughingstock, not just in Memphis, but everywhere. Everyone knows everything about Elvis, I mean everything. She pulled a newspaper, clipping from her desk, and handed it to me. Listen to this, it's from Variety, everyone reads it, you've seen it. I shook my head. Here's a picture of Elvis. Sorry, the king, he's wearing that black leather costume, and there's Anne Margaret, looking at him like she's in love. The caption says, Why Elvis's Protracted Stay in Hollywood. He's making a lot of movies, but the other reason he doesn't want to go home is a 5'3", sleepy-eyed blonde. Lots of pretty girls have tried to bust up the planned marriage with Priscilla, and it seems to be working. She started to cry, and I sat down next to her, trying to comfort her. I knew it was a beautiful romance. My old schoolmate and the great entertainer we both admired. I couldn't doubt Elvis's sincerity, but I also couldn't ignore the delays. Why was he taking so long? Was it distractions or temptations? Orson had come to Memphis to help, not to judge, but it was hard not to feel the weight of it all. Let's not talk about it anymore tonight. It's getting late. Did Elvis tell you about the gospel album? It's very beautiful, especially How Great Thou Art. She read the list of songs on the album demo. Come what may, down in the alley, fools fall in love, love letters. Tomorrow is a long time. How great thou art, by and by, farther along. If the Lord wasn't walking by my side, that one is especially beautiful. And then somebody bigger than you and I, where could I go but to the Lord? It ends with without him. She began to cry again. Without him. No, I couldn't live without him. A few weeks later, Charlie called. You were great with Priscilla, getting her to cancel the trip to Germany. Elvis is really glad. Did you talk to him? Yeah, a couple of weeks ago, but he didn't mention Priscilla or that I had been there. We talked about his movie contract. He wanted to know if I had noticed that it makes him the highest paid star in Hollywood. I hope you said no, so he could have the satisfaction of telling you. The king, he really knows nothing about money. He just likes to have as much as he can spend, which is a lot. Sure, spend and give away. You can't take that from him. He's more generous than Santa Claus. And works harder. Santa has only one night a year. Listen, Elvis wants you to come down to Bel Air. He'll be there only another week. Then he's going back to Graceland. He still insists on driving, won't fly these days. Sometimes he drives the bus himself. This time he says he's going to announce his formal engagement to Priscilla, but I'll believe it when I see it. Anyway, what he wants to do is thank you personally. There has to be an intermediary, me, because we're pals. So that's invitation number 1. Invite number 2, which Elvis knows nothing about, is for you and me to talk about Elvis's career. Why not come down, spend the evening with Elvis, stay over, and we'll spend the next day jawing. I've got a nice apartment with a spare room, and I've got a 16mm projector and all his films, and a complete set of the albums. Remember that, in case the Smithsonian loses its collection. Good old Charlie Hodge can always fill in. Okay, but let me think a little about the timing. My own work and other commitments. I never did ask about what was going on with Orson Killer, back when we visited in Potreros. Potreros, Los Potreros, but we can cover that ground next time. Like I said, Charlie, I've got to take a couple of soundings. What I'll try for is Friday for Elvis and Saturday for you. Is Elvis always free at night? He's always free mostly between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. They shoot late. And Elvis goes to sleep, as usual, around 5 or 6 a.m. All he has left with him at that point is the broads. We've all flaked out. Me, Lamar, Red, Joe. Some of us are around during the shoot and for a while after it. You know no, probably you don't know. Your time together was kind of offbeat. Anyway, he likes the gang, or at least a few of us Mafia, to be there after the workday. I'll call you Charlie. Thanks, Killer. There wouldn't be a problem at Albatron. Phil and Ruddy ran things loosely, and time clocks weren't kept. Orson had quickly picked up on the work there. The agenda was to experiment with semiconductors, aiming to create a super small silicon chip for printers and other accessories. His special assignment was to attract investors. 2 weeks ago, Eric Jessup, a young investor, had asked Orson to come and talk. Orson had spoken passionately about Albatron's potential, mentioning a survey by the Royal Typewriter Company that suggested typewriters were becoming obsolete. Something else will have to do the work of typewriters, and that's what we're trying to come up with, Orson had said. Eric had invited Orson to stay for lunch, and during lunch he asked personal questions. How did you get your sense of the industry? Did you major in electrical engineering? Orson looked at the wealthy investor, only a few years older than himself. I was kicked out of college before I had a chance to learn about computers. I ended college after my sophomore year. Jessup struggled to form his next question, but Orson helped him. You're asking why I was kicked out, Jessup nodded. Because I engaged in a demonstration against the university's trustees. It was a damn fool demonstration. I'm a socialist. Not just a plain socialist, but a world revolutionary socialist, like the anarchists of 1900. Do you still feel that way, Orson? Well, actually I do. It would be a better world, I think, but I don't go much for the halfway stuff. Theoretically, I could find myself voting Republican. My wife would have voted for Goldwater if she had been 21. How old are you? 21. Eric liked that. He liked Orson's honesty, his passion, and his vision. I think we'll go with Albatron. That's great. I hope we do well and make a mint. When Orson got back to the apartment, he found Susie. She was dressed in a flowered shirt and loose-fitting blue cotton pants, her hair carelessly tended and no lipstick. She knew and cherished Orson, but seemed unsure who he was. She tried to hide her confusion, but Orson encouraged her to ask questions, pretending he knew everything. "That was a very nice hotel, wasn't it?" she asked. "It certainly was. The people were nice, and the room was nice. Yes." She was taking an investigative step. "The scenery was so nice, don't you think? Terrific. I love it that way." Susan looked up and said tentatively, "You mean the mountains?" "Yes, the mountains you can see in Phoenix, way back on the horizon." Susan closed her eyes, trying to piece it together. Hotel, food, service, mountains. Could she hazard the name of the city, of even the state? "I want to go there again when I'm well." "Orson, how long does it take to get there?" He tried to help her, but it was hard. "Depends, darling, on how you travel. We could fly or drive. Drive. I don't think they'd let me drive." "Not now. I mean when all that is behind you, behind us." "Orson, are we?" He waited, hoping she would find her way back. "Are we best friends? Of course we are. And of course we are a lot more than that." The glaze came over her eyes, and the questioning stopped, but he tried to communicate more clearly. "I'm going to be away for a couple of days, Susie, but Vicky knows how to reach me. I don't want you to go away." Her face clouded up, and she wheeled away, a clear sign of her displeasure. "I'm not going away, Susan. I'm just going to be out of town a couple of days." "Well, will I see you tomorrow?" It was safest to say simply, "Of course you will, darling." A few days later, I was in Hollywood at the film studio. Charlie led me to a chair, and we watched Elvis on stage. He was dressed as a nightclub performer, Guy Lambert, sitting behind a desk. A soldier in uniform walked over to him. Guy cut. The director, Norman Torog, spoke to the actor playing the soldier. "Adrian, you're not nervous about anything, so don't stare at Elvis as though you expected he'd eat you up. You're just coming through the door with routine business. Back up and try it again. I won't shoot this time until we see how it goes. Sorry, Norm." Adrian went back to the door, paused, turned around, reopened it, and walked over to Elvis, this time looking more relaxed. Elvis sat patiently, but his mind seemed elsewhere. "Okay, let's try it now for keeps." Adrian returned to the door and went out. "All right, scene 54, take 9. The camera's word." Adrian opened the door and sauntered up to the desk. "Guy, I got to ask you something, a favor." "Well, what is it?" "Well, Guy, this is my birthday, and what I was hoping was you'd sing Old MacDonald. I can get your guitar. I know where it is in the closet." Elvis smiled with some effort. "Well, what the hell, birthdays don't come every day. Sure, bring in Bel Canto." "Cut, Elvis, the name you've given the guitar is Bel Canto, not Bel Cando. Back 2 lines, say, what the hell, and go on from there." The clapperboard snapped. Take 10. Elvis repeated the lines to the satisfaction of Norman Torog. Adrian walked back through the door and reemerged an instant later with a guitar. He walked with it to the desk. "Cut, Adrian, you're pleased, see. Pleased because Elvis is going to sing for you. Don't bring in the guitar with a sour expression on your face. A little smile would be good, first places." Adrian brought out the guitar again and handed it to Elvis. Elvis rose, turned his chair at an angle, and put his right foot on it, nestling the guitar on his knee. "Cut, all right." The director turned to the sound technician. "Go with Song 21, a play at regular volume." Elvis, same procedure. "We've got it on tape. You can sing it if you want. If not, just lip sync with feeling. And important, be sure to move your right hand as if you were actually striking the chords on the guitar." "All right, silence on the set," the boom operator yelled. The music blared, and Elvis sang Old MacDonald, with his body vibrating to the beat. He started by humming the song, then moved his lips. When he reached the words, E-I-E-I-O, he raised his voice to performance level, his body moving with the music. Cut, that's good, Elvis. But I could tell the difference between when you did that last bit, the E-I-E-I, and what came before. Watch it. Play it, Al. The camera whirred on rewind, and on the screen to one side, Elvis was seen taking up the guitar and singing the song. Now, watch the lips carefully, Elvis. The lips moved naturally, in sync with the music, but at the closing bar, Elvis's lips moved apart more pronouncedly, and his eyes took on a different look. See it? See what I mean, Elvis? Okay, let's go back. Begin at the beginning of the song. The director called a 10-minute break. I wondered whether to go over and greet Elvis. To do so, I'd have to walk on stage, past the dozen technicians moving about. I decided against jumping in right away. I'll wait till it's over, I told Charlie. How much they got left to shoot tonight? It was after 10. Charlie checked his script. Norm wants to get to page 89, where Elvis makes the phone call to Claire. Figure 11, maybe 11:15. I nodded, feeling excited. It was amazing to see a movie being made. Charlie looked at me suspiciously. Glad you're liking it, Killer. A few days later, we were in Bel Air, August 1966. Elvis pulled up in his Cadillac limousine. You ride with me, Killer. Red, Lamar, Joe, take the other car. I want to visit with my good old buddy from Germany. I sat in the back with Elvis. The driver started up. Elvis opened a compartment with a light and an array of liquors. How about a drink? I don't drink much, but you've come a long way. Where did you come from, Killer? Remind me. It's up by Seattle, Elvis. He nodded. Yeah, I remember, but I owe you. That trip you took to Graceland helped a lot. Priscilla called me the next day and said she wouldn't say much about going to Germany, just visiting family. She loves you, Elvis. She's very much in love with you, Elvis. And how about me? I spotted her when she was 14 and said I wanted to marry her. You should know that better than anyone. I mean, I stole her from you. She came running to your house to see me. I was with you and your mom, Francie. She just knocked me over, that little, beautiful girl, but it's going to be all right. We pulled up to the house. Elvis knocked and rang the bell. He called to the driver. Night, Jesse. See you tomorrow. Don't forget to unload Mr. Killer's gear. Wait, you need a ride tomorrow. Jesse, you can expect a call from Mr. Killer. Kill Air. Got that? Yes, sir, Mr. Presley. Jesse gave me a card. I'll be there whenever you call, Mr. Killer. The living room was big and blue. Red, Joe, Lamar, and Charlie came in and ordered drinks. Elvis offered me a pill. Don't know what I'd do without these, the schedule I have to keep. Lamar said he needed one too. The butler, Boykin, whispered something to Elvis. Who is it? Elvis asked. I'll tell her I'll call her later. He turned to me. Tell me about what y'all are doing up there near Seattle. I haven't been there in a long time. One of these days I'm going to call the colonel and say, Boykin whispered again. Damn it, tell her I can't talk now. I'm on a live broadcast to Lamar. Give me the name of a country. He laughed. Yes, Afghanistan. He turned back to me. I was talking about how did you like the movie just now. Norm is a perfectionist. He works and works on a film sequence, only settling for the best, and who am I to complain? You set pretty high standards yourself, Red said. How many takes did you do on those RCA sessions before the Army? Maybe 50 on Don't Ya Think It's Time. Remember that, Charlie. I did more than 20 takes on your song. Orson, did you know Charlie wrote You'll Be Gone? You heard it. I nodded. Great song. Boykin, when do we eat? Just put it all on the table. I'm putting on a little weight, you notice. Killer. Y'all go ahead and eat. He gulped down his tab and got his guitar. I feel like singin'. He started with All Shook Up. Everyone clapped and tapped their knees. I was transfixed. That's a beautiful song, Elvis, really beautiful. You like it? He beamed. Listen to this one. He stopped after a few bars. Charlie, give me a little drum beat, will you? Charlie turned over an empty plate and used 2 tablespoons. Elvis sang Kissin' Cousins. I tapped my foot and smiled. Would Elvis do one more? Elvis, Charlie said, play Tomorrow is a long time for Orson. To me. He recorded that song last week. Sure. Elvis nodded. This is a Bob Dylan number. He began to strum and sing. If today was not an endless highway, if tonight was not a crooked trail, if tomorrow wasn't such a long time, then lonesome would mean nothing to me at all. Everyone applauded again. Elvis sang until after 1 in the morning. Then he ate some fried chicken and said he had a movie for us. It was in the heat of the night. It was 4 in the morning when the movie ended. Lamar and Red had left. Elvis said he didn't like the movie much. It was too Southern. He told Charlie to call Alice and said to me, "Killer, you stay here tonight. We got everything, pajamas, you name it. I got 5 bedrooms here, and one of them is yours. You might want the one with the red wallpaper and black silk. It's real nice. Charlie, you can stay too if you want." I woke up to the alarm at noon, only 5 hours after I finally said good night to Elvis. Alice was on her knees, her head over his chest, and he was watching TV. "Don't forget to call me Killer. Come back soon, it's cool to see you." I got dressed and found my bag. I called Jesse to pick me up at 12:45. I went downstairs and saw Boykin cleaning up. I gave him a $10 bill and went out into the heat. Jesse picked me up, and we drove to Charlie's house. Charlie's place was substantial but modest compared to Elvis's. I arrived at 1 p.m. as agreed. The house was quiet, and I could feel the midday heat. I decided to take notes. Charlie and I had been listening to Elvis's songs, and he wanted to talk about what we knew. At this point, Elvis doesn't know a good song from a bad one. Charlie said, "He knows how to make a song really work, especially if it's a song he really wants to swing with. The songs from Hal Wallis and the gang are okay, but not many light him up. Elvis needs an audience. Cameras and technicians don't make an audience. Last night when he sang Tomorrow is a long time for us. That was the real Elvis. We weren't just technicians, that was the king. The movie people think movie watchers want a ton of backup when Elvis sings. They use bass, guitars, drums, organs, violins, and a choir. But when they don't let Elvis move without his choir, all you get is velvet. Elvis is an innovator. He came on the scene in 1954 with black music, blues, and a rock beat that tore us all apart. He had a kind of raunch that was new, the thing that drives the girls nuts, but that doesn't happen in a studio. I stopped taking notes. "So what are you going to do about it, Charlie?" "I think you mean, what are we going to do about it, Killer?" I looked at my notepad. "But you're telling me the Harum Scarum soundtrack didn't go above number 8 on the charts, and Blue Christmas didn't score at all. Aren't those signals the Colonel would notice? They should be, but he hasn't noticed them. Why should I have any luck if you all don't?" "I'm not saying you can make it work, but we think he'd listen if you said it. He needs to hear it from someone who isn't just part of the gang. We're employees, but you're an Elvis fan." I smiled. An Elvis fan, Charlie. The next day I called Elvis. "You bet, Killer. I'd be glad to see you again. I don't care that you were here a while ago. I'd like it if you came to see me every week, not every 10 years. "It wasn't exactly 10 years ago, Your Majesty. I was there in August. I'm going to be in town. My Susan has to be at the UCLA clinic for a couple of tests, and I'll be with her most of the time. But I'd like to visit for a couple of hours. A couple of days would be better. You talking about this Friday?" I was careful. I had checked Elvis's schedule with Charlie. He was shooting on Friday and Saturday, so Friday night should be good. But if Elvis made an excuse, I could find myself talking about the next Friday. "I'll be working late on my new flick, Easy Come, Easy Go, but you know all that stuff. You want to come to the set, meet me there. Can we play that by ear? I'll be coming in from the clinic. Tell you what, I'll leave word with Boykin that if you get to my place ahead of me, just let you in and give you a drink, and you can come over to the studio if you're real early. That will be great." The next problem was to get Elvis alone. I talked with Charlie about it. I couldn't let on that Elvis's own people were worried. I couldn't plead my case in front of Joe, Red, or Charlie. They were co-conspirators, but they wanted to hide their misgivings. "Charlie, this mission the Mafia has got me on is really tough. If Elvis is endangering his career, why wouldn't you guys spot it and be worried?" Charlie was quiet. "I didn't say it would be easy." "But you didn't say it would be impossible. If it's going to be impossible, why do it? To help Elvis." I gritted my teeth and forced a smile. "I guess you'd put it that way, Charlie. It goes, Orson, because you like this guy, and you think he and his music are important. You can't say no, even to an impossible assignment. Well, okay, I'll have to play it carefully." "Play it any way you want. We need to plant the seeds in his mind. The single and album from Frankie and Johnny never even got off the ground, not by Elvis's standards. The so-called vacation special the Colonel put out only got to number 19 on the charts. The albums from Paradise, Hawaiian Style, sold less than 250,000 copies, a new low. Elvis is in danger of losing his fans. I got to work early one morning, even before Phil, my boss at Albitron. I was sitting in the waiting room, reading yesterday's Wall Street Journal when Phil came in. "Orson, what are you doing here so early?" Phil asked, surprised. "I need to talk to you, Phil," I said. "Want some coffee?" "Here, take a dime. I need one too." Phil gave the vending machine his usual kick to get it to work. We both got our coffees and went into his office. I took a sip and told him, "Phil, I have to leave the company." Phil looked up, shocked. "What, leave Albitron? After just 10 months and 2 raises. Your work is great. Why?" I explained, "It's about Susie, my wife. The doctor thinks she's ready to start making big strides in her recovery. He says the best thing would be to take her somewhere peaceful, maybe with a beach, to help coax her memory back. I was thinking of a place like Cabo San Lucas in Baja, Mexico. It's cheap, only $12 a day for room and board. I can manage that for a while. If we win the lawsuit, we might even retire there. How long do you think you'll be gone?" "That's the hard part, Phil. I just don't know. But I wanted to let you know that if things work out with Susie, I'd really like to come back to Albitron. I know you understand, and I hope you'll consider having me back." Phil got up and walked around his desk. "You've done excellent work here. We'll miss you a lot. But I think whenever you're ready to come back, we'll want you. Unless we're broke or Tom breaks his other hand, how is Susie feeling about all this?" "I'm not sure, but there's hope," I said, looking up at him. Phil nodded and gave me a pat on the back. "Good luck, Orson. Take care of yourself and Susie." The next night, the company threw me a going-away party. Phil had asked me earlier if I would do my Elvis act for everyone. I had worked on it for a while, and I had performed it at Phil's birthday party a month ago. It was a medley of Elvis songs, with me pretending to sing while the real Elvis's voice came through the speakers. Back then, no one was really impersonating Elvis like they do now, so I had to use a carefully made tape. I started by imitating Elvis introducing a song, then swung into Hound Dog and Jailhouse Rock. I made big, exaggerated movements and faces, and the best part was when I turned the volume up for the canned applause at the end. Everyone at the party loved it and gave me a huge ovation. I felt great, but my mind was already on the journey ahead with Susie. We were going to Cabo San Lucas, and I was hopeful that it would help her remember. I just had to believe that we could make it work. Susan and I were staying at the Papagayo Hotel in Cabo San Lucas. It was a simple place, just 6 huts made of thatch, and everything was run by Carmen and Cecilio. Carmen was short and efficient, and Cecilio was tall and a bit dreamy. They did everything for us, from cooking to cleaning. There were no windows or electricity, just oil lanterns that Cecilio checked every other day. One day I brought a radio, and it told us about a big boxing match. Muhammad Ali knocked out Cleveland Williams. Susan said, "Nobody can beat Muhammad Ali," and then she looked at me, wondering if he had ever lost before. She was trying hard to remember things, but she had lost some of her memory. We talked a lot about her family, and she laughed when she told me her grandmother didn't like her dad's nickname, Muggsy. His real name was Morgan, but the nickname stuck. Susan started reading one of my old Agatha Christie books, and remembered loving detective stories when she was younger. She was getting better every day, and she even wanted to write a story. I told her I would write it down as she dictated it, but then she got quiet and asked me if we were married. I told her yes, we got married in the hospital. She was happy to know that, and she said she was getting a lot better. That night we made love, and she liked having the oil lantern on low. She said she wanted to be at Papagayo for a long time. Later, she asked if we had a baby. I told her about Carla, our beautiful little girl, who was safe with my mom in Germany. She was so happy to know about Carla, and we both cried with joy. In December, we got a call from Elvis. He was planning a big TV special, and he wanted me to be there. It had been a long time since I saw him, and I was excited. Susan was in Germany with Carla, so I could go. Elvis said he needed me for good luck, and he was going to send a plane to pick me up. I stayed with Phil and Bessie Andrade in Tacoma, and they were surprised when I told them Elvis was calling. I explained how we met in Germany when I was 14, and they were amazed. I was excited to see Elvis again and be part of his comeback. It felt like old times, and I couldn't wait to see what he had in store. I got back to Phil Androtti's house late on a Sunday. I had taken off early on Friday, thinking I'd catch up on work. I set my alarm for an hour earlier than usual. I really wanted to move back to my own place. Susan was away for a month, so I let the Androttis use my apartment. They didn't want to share a house with Phil, didn't want to pay for a hotel, and didn't want to visit for less than a month. It was a bit of a hassle for me, though, having to be quiet early in the morning so I didn't wake Bessie or Phil. The morning was sticky, and the newspaper I brought in from the porch felt damp. I unfolded it on the kitchen table while the coffee perked. The headlines were about a nuclear proliferation treaty, and there was an editorial pleading with Ronald Reagan not to run for the GOP nomination. The editor thought Nixon would be better for unity against the Democrats. I read it listlessly. I was humming Nothingville to myself, remembering how Elvis played it for me after the taping. He picked up his guitar, told the colonel and Red to shut up, and played it just for me. It was beautiful. The whole thing, the show, the song, and Elvis. The paper was full of talk about who would get the Republican nomination, Nixon, Rockefeller, or Reagan. I didn't really care. I wondered what Mr. Simon was up to in Wiesbaden, and what Lizzie, Eleanor, Barry, and Elsie were doing. They were part of the Students for Democratic Peace. Tom Bayliss once told me a story about the AFL-CIO, Executive Committee on Ethics. They met for 2 days, and CEO boss John L. Lewis asked if they had discovered any ethics yet. I thought about the students at Berkeley and the chaos there. Colleges were shutting down, and commencements were being postponed. But the war in Vietnam was still going on, and I was safe from it as a married father. I wondered what good a non-proliferation treaty would do when the world was already full of nuclear bombs. Phil Androtti didn't show up at the office that day. He called Bessie to say he'd be spending the night in Seattle. Something was going on, Bessie told me. She was going out to dinner with her in-laws. Phil didn't come in the next day either. Tom Bayliss was there, but he was holed up in his office. Rumors were flying. Hewlett-Packard was moving in on Albitron. Later that night, Phil Androtti told me the news. Hewlett-Packard was taking over, and it would be official the next day. I met with Henry Salter from Hewlett-Packard the following afternoon. He was a middle-aged guy in his 40s, and he seemed nice. He told me that Hewlett-Packard was impressed with my work, and that Phil and Tom had spoken highly of me. They wanted me to go to business school, specifically USC, and they'd pay for it. I'd have to commit for 2 years after finishing the degree, but they'd cover my expenses and keep my current salary. I was relieved and happy. I called Susan, but it was late in Germany. She asked about Phil Androtti. I told her he was out with a buyout package, and Tom Bayliss was being promoted. About half the guys were moving to San Francisco, and a lot to Los Angeles. "Honey, that's not the worst news in the world," she said. "They want to educate you. Maybe I'll go back to school too. We'll be with you in a week, unless this means we should stay longer." "I'll figure it out. I miss you, doll. Let me talk to Mom." Mom was happy with Susan and Carla. She mentioned a letter she sent with a clipping about Mr. Simon. He had died suddenly a week ago. She went to the funeral service. I asked what he died from, but I stopped myself. We talked about Carla and the renewed threat by Khrushchev to Czechoslovakia. Later, Lou Aylett came to my office. "Let's get the hell out of here and go to Seattle." He said I was all for it. Lou was a big deal at Albitron. He was 28, but had been in the computer world for 8 years. He worked long hours in the lab, sometimes around the clock. He led me to his Thunderbird in the parking lot. On the highway, he revealed he owned 5% of Albitron. I knew the company structure well, and I tried to figure out which pseudonym on the books was his. I guessed it might be the Hillman Brothers Fund. He chuckled about borrowing money from his dad, a small-time banker, to invest in Albitron. We went to see Jefferson Airplane, and then Lou introduced me to a couple of ladies. After a few drinks and the band's psychedelic music, my resolve weakened. It had been a nerve-wracking day, and the thought of going back to school and a new career was overwhelming. I thought about Elvis's music and the Rolling Stones' Satisfaction. I wanted to live a little, and I decided to go for it. Later, in a luxuriously appointed bedroom, I was with a woman named Becky. The room was dimly lit, and there was a Toulouse-Lautrec painting on the wall. I was transported by the moment, and I felt huge satisfaction. Becky was gentle and kind, and I hummed as I held her close. The next chapter would take place in Las Vegas, where Susan and I would finally see Elvis Presley perform live. The Colonel had worked hard to promote the show, and Elvis was excited to be back on stage. But then Elvis gave an interview that caused a stir. The Colonel was furious, and I had to call Susan to tell her what happened. Elvis had talked about money and how he made it by doing what people wanted to hear. He admitted that his music was influenced by African American artists, and that he had learned from them. The Colonel didn't like the money talk, and he didn't want Elvis to be seen as unoriginal. I thought Elvis was being honest, but I understood why the Colonel was upset. I promised to update Susan, and we talked about how exciting it would be to see Elvis in Las Vegas. We were both looking forward to it, even with all the drama. Charlie and I were sitting in his room, and he was telling me about Elvis's latest antics. Elvis had a run-in with some critics, who accused him of singing just for the money. But Elvis, being Elvis, had a way of standing his ground. He said he only sang because he loved it, even if it meant his legs wouldn't stay still and his eyes wouldn't stay open. Charlie thought Elvis's response was brilliant. Orson, who was listening, had a deep understanding of Elvis. He said that the Colonel, Elvis's manager, would do anything for money, but Elvis was different. Elvis really believed in what he did. That's what made him special. Then, out of the blue, Elvis called. He wanted to see the president, can you imagine? Elvis wanted to talk to President Nixon about the drug problem in America. He asked me to go with him to Washington, saying it was important. I couldn't help but laugh at the idea, but I also knew Elvis was serious. I talked to Susan about it. She thought it was a crazy idea, but she also knew how much Elvis meant to me. She gave me a little wave, which meant she was okay with it. So we decided to go. We caught the red eye to Washington. On the plane, Elvis kept talking about his plan to get a badge from the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. He wanted to use his fame to help fight drug abuse. I thought it was a noble goal, but I also wondered if it was a bit ambitious. During the flight, Elvis met Senator George Murphy, who promised to help us get in to see the president. Elvis was thrilled and showed me a letter he had written to President Nixon. It was heartfelt and sincere. When we landed in Washington, Elvis was ready to go. He looked like a king, dressed in his most extravagant outfit. We went to the White House, and Elvis handed his letter to a guard. The guard said the letter would be delivered, but we had to wait. We checked into a hotel, and I decided to go to the White House to see my old friend Bud Krogh. Bud worked for the president now, and I hoped he could help us. We talked about the old days at Ann Arbor, and then I explained why Elvis wanted to see the president. Bud was skeptical, but agreed to put in a good word. While I was at the White House, Elvis went to meet the director of the Bureau of Narcotics and Dangerous Drugs. When he came back, he was fuming. The director, John Ingersoll, had refused to give him the badge. Elvis was so upset that he started taking pills to calm down. I tried to cheer him up, but he was still angry. Then the Colonel's son, Andrew, called and invited us to dinner. Elvis wasn't in the mood, but I thought it might help him feel better. So there we were in Washington, with Elvis still determined to see the president. It was going to be a wild ride. It was way past midnight when we got the word. The president would see Elvis at 12:30 the next day. Elvis was pumped, like he'd just been given the keys to the kingdom. "Told you they'd come to their senses," he said, his voice a mix of excitement and relief. I tried to keep it real. "That's great, Elvis. Now what you ought to do is try to get some sleep." He waved me off, shaking his head. "I don't feel like sleepin'." I knew better than to argue. "You've got sleeping pills and that mix of yours, don't you?" He smirked. "Yeah, I do, killer. So you going to shove one up my ass?" I laughed, trying to lighten the mood. "Come on, I tell you what, I'm going to wake you up at 10. You'll just have to get up, like it or not. I'll have some breakfast ready. There's a gym in this hotel. You could take a steam bath, a swim, or even a karate workout." He looked at me like I was nuts. "And me go to a public gym? You kidding? I'll be all right, killer. You go ahead and turn in. I'm going to watch a little TV. Has Johnny Carson come and gone?" "Yep, it's after midnight. See you, Elvis. See you, killer." I hoped he'd take the sleeping pills, but I knew better than to push. In the morning, I woke up early and fixed us some breakfast. When Elvis finally emerged, he was dressed in his full Elvis regalia. The white jumpsuit with the gold trim, the big belt with the huge buckle, and his hair all styled and shiny. I couldn't hide my concern. "Elvis, you don't have to dress like that for the president." He adjusted his belt and looked at me with a serious expression. "Look, I'm Elvis, and I got to dress like Elvis. I got to put on a good show for my people." I bit my tongue. President Nixon wasn't exactly one of Elvis's people, but I didn't say that. Instead, I just nodded and helped him get ready. Before we left, Elvis pulled out a package from his suitcase. "This is my gift for the president." I couldn't help but smile. Elvis had thought of everything. We headed to the White House, both of us hoping this meeting would be everything Elvis needed it to be. As we drove, I thought about how far we'd come, and how much this moment meant to him. When we arrived, the security was tight, but we made it through. Inside, the atmosphere was different from anything I'd ever experienced. We were led to a small room where we waited for a few minutes. Then the door opened, and there he was, President Nixon. Elvis stood up straight, his eyes bright with anticipation. The president shook his hand, and for a moment, it felt like the world had stopped. They talked about music, about the country, and about Elvis's ideas for helping out. The president listened, and I could see Elvis relax a bit. After the meeting, we left the White House, and Elvis was buzzing with energy. It wasn't just the pills or the excitement. It was the feeling that he had connected with someone important, someone who understood him. As we walked back to the car, I felt a sense of pride. Elvis had done it. He had faced his fears, stood tall, and made a difference. For that moment, he was more than just the king of rock and roll. He was a man with a mission, and he had accomplished it. We drove back to the hotel, and Elvis couldn't stop talking about the meeting. He was planning his next steps, thinking about how he could use this opportunity to make a real impact. I listened, feeling grateful to be part of his journey. That night, as we got ready for bed, I looked at Elvis. He was still buzzing, but there was a calmness in his eyes. "You did great today," I said. He smiled, a rare, genuine smile. "Thanks, killer, I know I did." And in that moment, I knew everything was going to be okay. We had a long road ahead, but we had each other, and that was all that mattered.